Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. I'm going to give everyone just a moment to log in and then we'll get started. But thanks for being here on time. All right, so we'll get started. Again, welcome to today's webinar on turning dreams into degrees. Today is a Train the Trainer for folks who will be providing the training of Education Course 2, which is about supporting successful transitions from high school to college. Before we start, just want to go over a few logistics. This webinar is being recorded and we will send it out after today's webinar and also post it on our website, which we will send you the link so you have this for your reference for the future as well. Everyone, all the attendees are muted in this webinar and you can connect to the audio via your computer or via your phone. It should have given you that option when you logged in, but you can also change that at any time just by clicking the little microphone icon in the toolbar. And then you can also submit questions at any time in the Q&A function. We'll do our best to respond to those questions throughout the webinar. We're also going to have some time to respond to questions about halfway through the webinar, and then we'll also have some time for discussion around any other questions as well at the end of the webinar. And again, this will all be recorded for your reference as well. So my name is Jessica Petros. I'm a senior project manager here at John Byrne Advocates for Youth, and I'm also joined by my colleague, Debbie Rauscher, our Director of Education here at JBay as well. So before we dive into the actual content of the training, we wanted to start off with some background information for you as trainers. So just so you know, this particular training is targeted for caregivers throughout California that have foster youth in their care between 11th and 12th grade. And when we talk about caregivers, we're using a broad definition that could include resource families, relative, non-relative, foster family agency staff, or short-term residential treatment program staff as well. And so throughout this course, we're going to use the term caregivers to be inclusive of all types of caregivers. But of course, for you as a facilitator, you can definitely augment the language throughout the training based on your audience. For example, if you want to use the term resource parents throughout the training as well. Now, all of the materials that we're going to be talking about today, you can find them on the link, which is on the slide, and you can check that out right now if you'd like as well. We're just posting a few additional resources on there as we speak. But I would recommend bookmarking this so you have it for future reference. It's going to have everything that you need to do this training. So the PowerPoint slides as well will be on this website, and there's really detailed PowerPoint slide notes found within there too. So it's pretty much scripted for you. So you have all the language that you need to provide the training. Of course, please put it in your own vernacular so it sounds comfortable in the way that you would speak. There'll also be a trainer's guide on the website as well. And the trainer's guide, it's really meant to complement this PowerPoint presentation, and it gives you a description of the course materials, kind of general facilitation tips, different ways that you can consider presenting this, whether you're providing this training in person or virtually, a few notes, whether you're providing this in LA County or in California, and again, like really thorough ideas of how to provide the interactive opportunities as well. We're making a few final touches on the trainer's guide, so that'll be posted on the website as well for you early next week. So in addition to that, as we go through the training today, we'll highlight some of the interaction opportunities and give you some ideas of how to facilitate it depending on which modality you use. And, give you some ideas of how you might want to do it. We'll walk through some of them so you can get a sense of how to do it yourself. For others, we'll just sort of explain to you, how you might want to consider doing it. Also on this website, when you go to the materials, there's a section that says caregiver materials. And we'll share that link with you as well. But essentially, as we go through this training, there's a lot of handouts and materials that we created specifically for the caregivers. And so they'll have their own unique link that you can provide to them so they can access all the handouts and materials that we reference that are specifically for them. The link that's on this screen right now is not for caregivers, that is for you as the trainer. So you have your materials that you need to provide this training successfully to caregivers. And, just to get a sense, I'm just kind of curious, this training also complements Education Course 1, which is designed for youth in 6th through 10th grade. So I just wanted to get a sense of how many of you maybe have already attended the first training, so I get a sense of who's in the audience today. So if you wouldn't mind, I just noticed a typo here. I'm just launching a poll. If you could just indicate yes or no if you attended the Train the Trainer for Education Course 1 in June. It says Ed Course 2, but it should say Ed Course 1 there in June. Just want to get a sense of how many people are new joining us today. Okay, thank you. Great. So it looks like about 75% of you joined us for the initial Train the Trainer and Education Course 1, and some of you are just joining us today for the first time. So thank you so much. That'll just help us to keep that in mind as we go through the training today. Next slide. So actually, one thing I wanted to mention, knowing how many of you attended the first training. So this training is meant to complement, as I mentioned, Ed Course 1, which is for those with youth and younger grades in 6th through 10th grade. Generally, most caregivers will probably attend just one of the trainings. They might attend the one for younger grades, or they might attend the one for older grades. And so keeping this in mind, some of the content in today's training will be similar as the training in Ed Course 1. Pretty much some of the initial framing and slides that we'll have, and I'll highlight those for you as well. But the second half of the course is definitely all new information unique to 11th and 12th graders. And so I know that some of you as agencies will be providing this training to your staff, and your staff will be receiving both of these trainings. And so feel free to adapt the training to whatever's going to work best for your audience. And so if you want to pull out some of the sections that are the same as Ed Course 1, you can definitely do that so they don't have to hear the same material twice, but just, keep that in mind as well. All right. Another few updates to share with you. The training that we're sharing with you today is in English, but we will be translating this course as well as Education Course 1 in Spanish. So that's to come, and we'll definitely let everybody know who's registered for today when that's available in Spanish as well. And as I mentioned, Ed Course 1, we did a Train the Trainer for that last month. If you weren't able to join and you're interested, all the resources for Education Course 1 can be found on that link on the slide. And we also recorded that webinar. So if you missed it and you want to check it out, you can go to the website and watch that pre-recorded webinar as well. Another update for Education Course 1 is that this content is also available on Foster Parent College. And we'll put a little handout in the chat for you. But if you're not familiar, Foster Parent College is a online interactive website that has a whole host of trainings for caregivers. They're very interactive. There's videos, true and false, drag and drop, things of that nature. And Education Course 1 is available on there. And it's actually free for Californians caregivers. So if you're a caregiver in California, you should be able to access the training for free. And there's information on the handout on how to do that. Basically, your agency, will want to get signed up so your caregivers can access this. So just so you know, that's a resource as well. And we will eventually be working to convert today's training, Education Course 2, on Foster Parent College as well. So ultimately, caregivers will have the option to either receive these materials on Foster Parent College or through you all providing these trainings out in the community. And another update I wanted to share with you, I know many of you on today's training are from LA County, which is great. And just so you know, in LA County, we're really excited. Our partners at LACO with the LA County Office of Education are actually also getting trained up on this curriculum. And so moving forward, they will be able to support LA County by providing ongoing train the trainers and also offering this training in English and Spanish to those that might need this, particularly maybe our STRTP staff or FFA staff who will be getting this training as well. So those dates still need to be determined, but I'm really excited that LACO will be providing these resources as well. And our partners at FKCE, Foster and Kinship Care Educators, they have been providing these trainings in English and Spanish for the last 2 years, and they are continuing to do so. And FKCE will be continuing to provide these throughout LA County, and those are courses offered to our resource parents. So just wanted you to be aware of, where this course is also being offered out in the community. All right, so those were just some of our, background information for you as trainers. Now we're really going to dive into the slides as your caregivers would see it, moving forward through the rest of the training. And again, these slides will be on that website that I mentioned as well. So just so you know, this training was created by John Byrne Advocates for Youth, as well as our partners at Unite LA. And we were happy to get support and input from our foster and kinship care program educators in LA County, as well as LA County's DCFS program and Foster Parent College, as well as the LA Opportunity Youth Collaborative. So our objectives for today, we have them up on the screen. Life after high school, it's a really big transition for so many folks. And what we often find is that a lot of times foster youth, they just don't start preparing early enough. A lot of times these conversations happen late in the game, maybe at the end of their senior year of high school, and they end up missing out on a lot of key resources and opportunities. So this training is really going to help caregivers understand how to support their youth to make that smooth transition from high school to college. And, for many students, even for caregivers, us as adults, navigating the pathways to higher education can feel really intimidating, confusing, overwhelming. And so we want to make sure that caregivers really feel confident in being able to support their young people through this process. And we really feel that caregivers can really play a really critical role in assisting youth through this process as well. So after the training for today, caregivers will be able to explain the benefits of post-secondary education, identify resources that can help students explore their career interests as well as their education options, describe key educational planning milestones in 11th and 12th grade, as well as really know those key steps and resources for applying to college and financial aid, as well as become more familiar with all the specific resources and benefits and supports that are out there to help foster youth really be successful in their post-secondary education. And just as a note, this course is really designed for all caregivers. So regardless of your own level of education or experience with college, we think that you can come into this and learn this basic information and still be able to support a young person into higher education. So as I mentioned, this is the link specifically for caregivers. This is where they're going to receive all their supplemental handouts that will be referenced throughout the course. So, you can share this in the chat with folks. If you're doing this training in person, you can print some of these materials as well. But it's just a good link to give to them so they can reference in the future as well. So what is post-secondary education? Before we kind of jump into all the nuts and bolts of applying to college and things like that, we wanted to really clarify what this definition is. I think for a lot of people, they think of that traditional four-year college pathway. But post-secondary education, also known as higher education, it really means any formal education that happens after high school. So this could include apprenticeships, trade school, career and technical education, programs like Job Corps. It can include community college or your traditional four-year college or university path. So we're going to talk more about all those different pathways later in the training today, but just so you know, we're going to use terms like post-secondary education or higher education, college, interchangeably, and know that when we're using those terms, we're really referring to all those different various educational pathways that are out there after high school. So why college? This section is similar as an education course 1. So if you were to adapt your training for your audience, this would be one of those sections that you could consider taking out if you're providing this training to an audience who will be receiving both. So why are we talking about college? What are the benefits? Why does this really matter for our young people? So simply put, the investment you make into a college degree, it pays off in terms of future earnings. So you can see on the screen here, students that get a high school diploma, their average annual salary is about $40,000. When you look at folks that get a bachelor's degree or a four-year degree, their average median annual salary is about $65,000. And that adds up. So when you add that up over a lifetime, that could translate into $1 million more dollars. But it's not just about the money. There's other benefits to, achieving a higher education as well. Not only do they receive more money, but they have greater job stability and lower rates of unemployment. Actually, today, over 65% of all jobs require some form of post-secondary education. And then on the flip side, the jobs that don't require higher education, they're becoming fewer and fewer, they're more competitive, they pay less, and they have less job security. So if you invest in a college degree, not only do you make more money, but you have more options that also pay better too. But it's also associated with other positive life outcomes, improved health outcomes, more likely to volunteer or vote, lower rates of incarceration, greater likelihood of one's own children attending college. And then I think the one that matters most to me is increased career satisfaction. Because I think the goal is we're not just trying to get youth a job. We're really trying to help them move into meaningful careers and really become self-actualized adults. So when we're thinking about higher education, I think it's thinking beyond just self-sufficiency. We don't just want our youth to survive, right? We want them to thrive. And higher education is really part of helping them achieve their overall well-being. So we know the benefits of post-secondary education, but what does this look like for our young people in California? So I'm going to launch a poll to get you to think about what percent of youth do you think want to go to college? How many of them do you think actually enroll in college? And how many of them do you think actually earn a 2-year or 4-year degree? Now, many of you already attended this training, so we'll see if you still remember the content. So let me launch that poll for you real quick. All right. So you should see that poll up on your screen. So all those 3 questions are on there and you can vote to all 3 and then we'll discuss the results. Give everyone just a few more seconds here. Okay. All right, I'm gonna end the poll. Show you guys the results. So it's good you guys are remembering stuff from our first training. Most of you guessed that 91% of them want to go to college. And that is true. When they surveyed our youth throughout the state of California, most of them, do aspire to go to college and see the benefit in that. Now, what percentage of foster youth who graduate from high school actually enroll in college? Again, looking at foster youth throughout the state of California. About 50% of you did guess that it is 48%, and that as well is correct. But that number is lower because a lot of our young people do face a lot of barriers with applying to college. And although they might want to go to college, there's a lot of obstacles that can get in the way just in being able to actually enroll. And so we're going to talk today about how we can set students up for success to be able to successfully apply and enroll into college. And then what percentage of foster youth earn a 2-year or 4-year degree by the age of 23? So about 61% of you guessed 11%, and that is correct. So only about 11% of our youth, once they actually attend college, make it through to get that degree. On a positive note, I will say that that number has been increasing over the years, but we still have a lot more work to do. And there's a lot of obstacles students face once they're actually at a college campus. Some students just don't have that support system in place or guidance. Many of our youth might struggle with housing insecurity or homelessness, food insecurity. A lot of our youth share that no one really taught them the basics of how you're supposed to study or how you're supposed to manage your time. And they didn't feel like they were really set up for success to do well in their classes. Or even just mental health, right? A lot of our young people have experienced trauma, and due to no fault of their own, right, the effects of that trauma continue while they're adults, and that can impact their education as well. So there are a lot of barriers, but the good news is there's a lot of resources out there at college campuses today, and we're going to really dive deeper into that near the end of today's training to show you what all those resources are, because one of the key things that a caregiver can do is play a really critical role in connecting them to those resources early on before they even graduate from high school, so that they're set up for success to help prevent some of these obstacles from even happening in the first place. Okay. So, we just did this quiz via poll, but we also built into the slides animation. So if you were doing this training in person, you can kind of just poll your audience by having them raise their hands and show the answers on the slides as well. So many ways you can facilitate this. So, we showed these stats, and they could feel a little depressing, the 11%, but the good news is, youth are going to college and they are beating the odds. And I think today's training is really going to be able to equip you with those skills and also know what those resources are to get youth connected to help them be successful in this journey. And, this is actually a picture of some students from UCLA, and they're sitting here with some of their staff from their foster youth program at UCLA. I think the single most important factor when we think about, what can be done to help young people achieve their dreams is having that consistent, lasting, positive relationship with a caring and engaged adult. And of course, that can be the caregiver. And a lot of times our youth just haven't had that type of support. They don't have a person in their life, and caregivers can really be that person to encourage them and support them and motivate them and send positive messages along the way. And of course, help them with some of those nitty gritty, like how to apply to financial aid steps as well. And if you really don't feel like you're confident in doing some of those steps, you can at minimum make sure they're connected to someone in their life who can be that person for them and help them through this process. So what we have on here is a moment to do a reflection. Now, we're not actually going to do this in today's Train the Trainer, because this is really a reflection for caregivers. And I know that probably most of you on the call may not be caregivers yourself. So this question may not pertain to you, but this is an opportunity to just check in with your caregivers and get them to think about how often they're already talking to youth in their care about college. Is it daily? Is it weekly, monthly, maybe once a year, maybe not at all? And I think it's important to set the stage with them that there's no judgment, no criticism, right? If you're doing this in person, you might have people raise their hands. If you're doing this virtually, you might do a poll or use other tools such as Mentee. But it's really just to check in, because it's never too late to start. Ideally, we want caregivers talking to their youth early on, middle school, and having these conversations often. But if they haven't had those conversations yet, now's a good time to start. And I think the key message to hit home is that they want to have these conversations with young people often. It's not just a one and done thing. Do you want to go to college? Yes or no, and then moving on. It's really an ongoing process and journey for many young people with many key steps and points along the way. And we just want caregivers to kind of reflect to see where they're at right now. And hopefully by the end of the training, they'd be encouraged to have more ongoing regular conversations with their youth. All right, so I'm going to turn this over to Debbie to talk about the next section. I will say again, for our attendees who were at Education Course 1, Train the Trainer, this section as well is very similar to the first training. We added a little bit new material on out-of-state colleges, just dive a little bit deeper on understanding the different pathways, but in general, it's very similar content as the first training. Again, just to keep in mind, depending on how you choose to implement the training to your audience. All right, Debbie.
All right, thanks so much. So a college path for everyone. So the term college can mean a lot of things. And, the most common college experience that's portrayed in the media is a first-time student enrolling in a four-year university as a freshman. That's what people typically see, but there are in fact many more paths available. And so in this section, we're going to talk about what those different paths are and really emphasizing that foster youth should feel empowered with information about these various paths so that they can make the choice that's best for them. So the next slide shows this great little graphic here with an overview of the different educational pathways that are available. So again, it's kind of this traditional pathway where a student gets a high school diploma, goes directly to a four-year college or university. That can be a public university like University of California, UC, or CSU, or it can be a private college or university like USC or University of San Diego. And these kinds of programs typically offer bachelor's degrees, BA or BS, and also have graduate programs, master's and doctoral degrees. But that's definitely not the only pathway and not actually the most common pathway for students. So another pathway is a student with either a high school diploma or a GED can go to a two-year community college. And community colleges are very accessible. They offer a wide variety of post-secondary education programs. Students can get a two-year degree, which is known as an associate's degree. They can earn a certificate in a career or technical education field, and I'm going to talk much more about that in a minute. Or if they want, they can go on to transfer to a four-year college or university where they can get their bachelor's degree. One thing to just note is that California community colleges offer priority admission to the CSUs and UCs, and they also offer priority admission to 39 historically Black colleges and universities, commonly referred to as HBCUs. These are typically located in the South and on the East Coast. A couple examples are Fisk University, where then Congressman John Lewis attended, Tuskegee University, if you're familiar with the famous Tuskegee Airmen who fought during World War II. And then these two-year community colleges, as I mentioned, also offer these certificate programs. There's also other certificate, career and technical education programs offered outside of the community college context. We refer to these as standalone programs. I'm going to talk more about those in a minute. The most important thing I think to understand here for caregivers to understand is that pathways into higher education, and one or another is not inherently better. So it's really about finding the pathway that is the best fit for any specific youth. There's a handout that Jessica's gonna that's available on our resources list on the website that provides some additional information about these various pathways. And so this is something that you can hand out to the caregivers during the training. The other thing I just want to note about this is that it's important to remember that college is different from high school in many ways, and students might not be aware of these differences. So a student may not realize that in college they get to choose the classes that are most interesting to them based on their particular goals and interests, or that if they're not a morning person, they can try to have their classes in the afternoon or even in the evening. And there's a second handout as well that really walks through the differences between high school and college. And this also should be made available to the caregivers, and it's something that they can provide to the youth in their care, and can be particularly helpful for youth who maybe don't enjoy high school, who are thinking, oh, I don't want to just do more of these classes, I'm not interested in this, to understand that college can be really different from high school, to help motivate them to think about their post-secondary aspirations. So we go to the next slide. I mentioned career and technical education, so I'm going to say a little bit about what that is. So these career and technical education refers to programs in it's such a broad range of fields. Just some examples are engineering and industrial technology, construction, culinary arts, computer and information science, lots of different healthcare fields, like jobs you can get are being a website developer, a dental hygienist, a diagnostic medical sonographer, if anybody knows what that is, a cosmetologist, an esthetician, or a construction site inspector. I mean, the list goes on and on and on like that. It's literally hundreds of different career paths that somebody can go into with a CTE credential. A lot of these programs are shorter term. So if the idea of a 4-year post-secondary path feels intimidating, caregivers can explain to youth that some of these programs are 6 months, 12 months, and can lead to certificates and increase wages. Just as an example, if a student gets a certificate in plumbing from LA Trade Tech College, the average wage coming out of a program like that is $60,000 a year. That's more than many people make directly after getting a bachelor's degree. And so these can be very lucrative career paths that don't take a lot of time. Financial aid is often available for CTE programs. As I mentioned before, many are offered at community colleges, which typically foster youth will be available to attend for free. There's also programs, as I mentioned before, that we refer to as like standalone programs outside of community colleges. One such example is Job Corps. Job Corps is a government program that gives youth an opportunity to learn career skills ranging from construction to water management to office administration. It's a free residential education and job training program, so they're actually offered housing as part of the program. They receive a basic living allowance. This is different from, for example, like the military, which is considered a full-time job with an educational component, whereas Job Corps is really structured as a training program. So go to the next slide. I just want to say a note about proprietary or for-profit private vocational schools. So these are another option for career and technical education. However, they cost significantly more than community college programs. And in fact, several proprietary institutions have come under scrutiny in recent years for poor employment outcomes, subjecting students to really lots and lots of debt. Some of these are online, some of these are physical campuses. You may have heard in the past of like ITT Technical Institute. This is a college that actually shut down after multiple lawsuits alleging all kinds of fraud. There's been others, Corinthian, these places that have been shut down. A lot of the graduates struggle to find employment. They may never be able to repay student loans. And so, some of them are even under federal investigation. So they have really strong marketing campaigns. So they promote themselves on the internet, and they sometimes even seek out populations like foster youth. And it can be hard to determine what's legitimate and what's not. So students should exercise extreme caution before enrolling in any kind of proprietary school that charges tuition. Again, you know, community colleges offer all these different kinds of programs for free or you know, very low cost. So be very careful about this. You'll see in the trainer's notes when you're doing this training that we do provide a link to a website where people can go on and actually look and see whether an institution is eligible to receive the Cal Grant. And so California excludes institutions from the Cal Grant that have over a certain threshold for loan default or below a certain threshold for employment rates. So that can be a good way to at least tell whether the school has decent outcomes. If we go to the next slide, just want to kind of, a little tip here, which is that regardless of which of these paths a student chooses, research has shown that those who enroll in college directly after high school are 40% more likely to persist in college than those who take a year or more off. This is based off of a study of community college students. And so we encourage caregivers to encourage students to support transition directly from high school into post-secondary education rather than taking time off, which really means, you know, if they have somebody in their care in the 11th and 12th grade, which is the target for this training, they really need to start the planning now with their young people. All right, so the next slide, we're going to do another quiz here. So I've just shared some information with y'all about community colleges, public four-year universities, and private colleges or universities. Actually, I'll talk about that in a minute, but in terms of community colleges and public four years. And so we've got some statements, and we want you to identify which of these it applies to. So I think Jessica's going to launch a poll. The first statement is, which of these has a selective admissions process with minimum GPA? It has a selective admissions process that requires testing and essays. Is it a community college, a public four-year, or a private college? So which of these types of institutions has a selective admissions process that requires testing and essays?
You can select more than one answer.
Thank you. Yes, select more than one if it applies to more than one. I'll give you a minute here to make your choices. All right, we're ready to close the poll. Let's see what you all said. Yeah, so most of you got it right. So public four-year universities and most private colleges have a selective admissions process. On the other hand, community colleges have no minimum GPA requirements, no admissions testing, no essays. Community colleges are truly open access. And so if a student doesn't want to have to write essays and worry about having a particular GPA, community colleges are available to them. All right, the next one, which of these types of institutions offer housing? For example, dorms. So we can launch the next poll. All right, and again, you can pick more than one. So which types of institutions do you think offer housing? Community colleges, public four years, and or private colleges or universities? All right. Let's see what people think. All right. Oops, my apologies. I have a dog here. Sorry about that. Okay, so yes, most of you got this right. Public four-year universities and in most cases private colleges offer on-campus housing. In contrast, community colleges do not generally have housing available except for a small number of rural campuses that do offer housing. Jessica, would you mind doing the next couple of questions? I'm going to deal with the dog really quick. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so the next question here is, which schools require students to have a passing grade in specific high school classes in order to be admitted? Is it a community college, a public four-year, or a private college or university? So let me launch that poll for you. All right, give everyone just a few more seconds here. All right, see. So yeah, you're correct. Generally, public four-year universities and a lot of private schools, occasionally some career and technical education programs will require passing grades in specific courses. Every university is different, but they do require that to be admitted, they have to have passing grades in specific high school classes. So at California public universities, for example, these are referred to as the A through G courses for admission. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on, but students have to receive a passing grade in specific classes around those A through G courses, in order to be admitted into those universities.
Thanks, I'm back. I can take over now. So, all right, the next one is, which kind of programs offer multiple degree or certificate options, such as career and technical education? So we're going to launch the poll. So again, which types of program or which types of institutions offer multiple degree or certificate options, such as career and technical education? All right, let's see what y'all think about that one. Yeah, all right. Looks like almost all of you identified community colleges. That's great. Students attending community college can receive an associate's degree, also known as a two-year degree, or a certificate in a career technical education program. Students at a community college can also go on to transfer to a four-year college or university. So lots of possibilities for students at a community college. And last but not least, which of these types of institutions do you think typically have smaller class sizes? So which typically have smaller class sizes? Community colleges, public four-year institutions, or private colleges? All right, let's see what y'all think. Yeah, so again, you nailed it. Typically, community colleges and private colleges and universities have smaller class sizes. Many of the courses offered at public four-year universities tend to be larger. Just a note for trainers, if you're doing this training in person, you can do this same exercise and ask attendees to raise their hands for the different options. Or if you have a smaller group and you don't want to do polls, then you can just have, you can ask for each statement and have people put A, B, or C in the chat box, or you can set up a poll like we did for this one. All right. So last, I'm going to say just a few words about out-of-state colleges and universities. We didn't really mention them in the last exercise or in what I've talked about previously because they vary quite a lot, but there are a few things to know. So tuition is, the cost of the courses or the instruction to attend a college or university, and it's typically more expensive at an out-of-state college or university than in an in-state public college like a CSU or UC. Since if you go out of state, even at a public institution in another state, students have to pay out-of-state tuition prices, which are typically higher. For example, tuition and fees for a full-time student for California resident at a UC is about $14,000. It's about $5,700 at a CSU, whereas the average private university tuition cost is about $26,000, $27,000. However, Despite the higher costs, a lot of these institutions do provide significant financial aid. And so students who are interested in an option like this should still explore what their options may be. In addition, there's something called the Western Undergraduate Exchange Program, and this allows California residents to pay reduced tuition, no more than 150% of the school's resident tuition rate at certain selected colleges. So there may be options for these students, and attending college out of state can be a mixed bag. In some cases, it provides a new environment and can be a really exciting experience. In other cases, it can be a bit of a culture shock, and students might not have the same kind of safety net in place if they go out of state. So it's really important to think about all of these different parameters when advising students. The admissions process for these institutions varies a lot, so students need to check their websites to understand what the criteria are, what their housing options are, what the class sizes are, what resources there might be for foster youth. There are actually a lot of programs in other states now for foster youth, similar to those in California. And so, you shouldn't exclude out-of-state institutions as a possibility. You can just, but it's important to just take all of these into consideration. And I do see a question in the chat about this, the Western Undergraduate Exchange Program. So I'll just sort of repeat that. Basically what that is there's these interstate agreements so that a resident of California can go to a campus in another state that California has an agreement with through this program. And that California student pays no more than 150% of the resident tuition rate. So let's say a student wants to go to University of Arizona, and the kind of list tuition for an out-of-state student is $30,000. I'm making that up. I don't know if that's the actual tuition. But the in-state cost is only $10,000 for a resident. That student would only have to pay $15,000, so 150% of the resident cost rather than the $30,000 non-resident cost. So it's a little confusing, but it basically gives students, can give students a pretty significant discount on tuition fee for any of the institutions that happen to be part of that agreement. So, and in the trainer's notes for that slide, we do provide a link where you can kind of look up and better understand that program. All right, so with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Jessica.
Great, thank you. So now that we've spent a little bit of time talking about the different college pathways, how can caregivers actually help their youth figure out which pathway is best for them? And it really depends on the youth. It depends on their educational goals, their career interests, their learning styles. And as we mentioned before, it's not that any pathway is inherently better than the other. It's really about figuring out what's best for that young person. And so in an ideal world, you would first help the youth figure out their career interests, figure out what they want to do, and then what type of degree, major or certificate is needed to reach that goal, and then which institution or college offers that program. So while that's ideal, of course, it doesn't always work that way. It's not always a linear process, and youth, their goals and their interests might change over time. So it's definitely a conversation that you want to continually revisit with a young person. I think many of us can remember too, being a teenager, maybe some of us had it all figured out what we wanted to do, but a lot of us, it was a very iterative process. So we're going to talk about different tools and resources that caregivers can use to help youth explore what their career interests are and their strengths and their interests. But before we do that, I think the most important thing that a caregiver can keep in mind is that the most effective tool in their toolbox is that relationship that they build with the youth and that rapport that they establish with them. Once that's been established, they're going to be much more receptive and open to some of these resources and tools and conversations. And so here's just one model to think about as a way to think about building rapport with a young person. It's this PACE attitude, and it stands for playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. So playfulness it's really just kind of this willingness to laugh and joke and be playful, even in difficult situations. It doesn't mean like trying to crack a joke when someone's really sad, but just trying to be more open and receptive to what's positive in life. This can particularly be helpful for our youth who have experienced trauma throughout their life as well. The other one is acceptance. And, particularly for teenagers who are doing a lot of self-exploration, having unconditional acceptance for that youth and where they're at can really create this context of safety and connection with them. Doesn't mean you have to agree with their beliefs or their behaviors, but it's just kind of recognizing where they're at, honoring that, and letting them know that actively and understand and acknowledge, some of their feelings and beliefs that might be underlying some of their behaviors that they're showing outwardly. The next one's curiosity, and I think this is a really key one when thinking about building rapport. It's really being curious without judgment, and it really helps build that social relationship with a young person. And it's just kind of coming in wondering, what's going on for that young person and that child? What's the meaning behind that behavior that you're seeing? So, it's just trying to tell that young person, I'm just trying to understand you, trying to understand why. What are you asking the young person? Like, what do you think was going on for you when that happened? Or what do you think that was about? Or I wonder what, X, Y, and Z. And it's just sort of asking these questions to give the young person an opportunity to share about what their experience is like, without kind of having any anticipation or expectation of how they should respond. And then lastly, empathy. And that's all about being understood. And it really helps fuel a sense of connection with the person, create safety for them, and helps them feel compassion for that adult. And so I think with empathy, especially when a child or youth is sad or they're in distress, it's really just showing them that you feel where they're at and that they're not alone. And so I think keeping some of these components in mind can be helpful when you're trying to, first and foremost, establish that relationship with the young person in your care. So here we have some different tools that caregivers can use with youth to help them explore careers and interests. And this is really important because it can really help increase the youth's motivation. Some youth may not like school, they may not be doing well in school, may not be very motivated. And so if you can find a career that's exciting to them, that they get that they might look forward to, it might actually help them to be more engaged in school if they understand that there's a reason and a purpose why they're sitting in class all day that they're working towards. It also helps the youth decrease the likelihood of, picking the wrong path. Like if they have a job interest that they have that only requires a certificate, there's no need for them to go into a 4-year college program because that's a waste of their time and their money, right? So we want to make sure that they're on the right path depending on what their interests are. So we have some resources listed on the slide. There's also an accompanying handout with all this information that caregivers can look at. Gladio is a really fun one. They can figure out what their interests and skills are. Because for some youth, you're going to ask them, what do you want to do as a career? And they're going to have no clue. And then you might even ask them, what are your strengths or your interests? And they might even have a hard time identifying that and not be able to translate some of what they're doing and some of their interests that they have right now. So you kind of have to meet the youth where they're at. And so these tools are really helpful. And as a tip, caregivers should do this with the youth. This is a great activity that they can do together, a great relationship building, and it helps start a conversation. If you're not quite sure where to start in the conversation, they can take one of these fun quizzes, and then you can talk about the results that they get from it. There's another guide that our partners with the LA Opportunity Youth Collaborative have been creating, this supportive adults guide for career planning. It's not quite finished, but it's another great resource. And once that's done, we'll also put that on the website as another, tool in that caregiver's toolbox that they can reference. So we actually wanted to demo one of the websites for you. This is California Career Zone, and it's hyperlinked on the slide, so you can click on it and it'll take you to the website. So I'm just going to quickly show you what this looks like, because I think if caregivers are more familiar with some of these tools, they'll be more confident to use them with youth. So let me just switch my screen sharing real quick. Oops. Actually, can you see the screen, Debbie? Does it show the website?
Yes,
Okay.
I can.
Great. Okay, so what we're going to do is click Discover Possibilities. We're going to go to the interest profiler for today. And this website has all kinds of information about all the different careers in California, wages, things like that. We're just going to show you one of the tools, and we're going to do the interest profiler. For the sake of time, we'll just do the 30-question mini one. And this asks the youth a lot of questions about their interests to help them get ideas of what kind of careers might be available in line with their interests. So for the sake of time, I'm just going to quickly kind of pick random ones, but like, does building kitchen cabinets sound fun to you? Or developing a new medicine, writing books or plays? So they just kind of go through these questions, indicate which things like they would be interested in or not. I'm just randomly picking some, and then it'll give us some results. Okay. So then we click Summarize, and they get a summary of some of their top 3 interest areas. So for this student, it would be enterprising, artistic, and realistic. And then what they can do is they click View Occupations, and it shows them all these different job opportunities that are out there depending on their interests. So web developers, a technical director, sound engineering technicians. And I think this is great because a lot of youth, you don't know what you don't know. A lot of youth may have only been exposed to social workers or teachers, police officers, and they may not even realize all the different types of career opportunities that are out there. So this really starts to help them expand the possibilities of what's possible. So it has all these career options. We'll just randomly pick one. We'll pick a web developer. And then it shows what the average salary is for that. So web developer can earn about $90,000. It shows how many annual openings there are, what the job market looks like. And then it talks about the job, what they do, what interests and work values people in those fields usually have, things to know about it. But then what's also really cool is it shows what kind of education and training is required. And so it'll show here's the different types of programs or certificates you can get and what types of certifications. So for this particular field, you don't necessarily need a bachelor's. There's all these types of certificates that you can get to make actually quite a bit of money, $90,000. And then it'll show like, oh, you could do computer programming in general. And it shows, oh, there's 141 schools that offer this program. And then it actually lists, this is a certificate program. You don't even have to go to a bachelor's, and it shows all the community colleges that offer that particular program. So again, this is just a great tool you can do with youth to see what type of opportunities are out there. So I am going to go back to our PowerPoint. All right. So there's other tools out there too. Some of these tools, we put them in a different category because they could be used to help navigate reality testing questions for youth. So I used to work with a lot of young people and even high schoolers, and you ask them about their plans after high school. And they were thinking they were going to have a Ferrari and they were going to have a house. And they had this vision of this lifestyle that they thought they were just going to somehow move into directly after high school without having any reality about maybe the cost of living, the type of income you need to be able to have the lifestyle you want, what kind of jobs are necessary, or education to be able to make that kind of money. And so these are some tools that you can use with them because youth need to explore, okay, what's the earnings in these jobs? And then what's the cost of living where I live? And what kind of lifestyle do I want? And how much money do I need to make to have that life? And then what are the educational requirements needed to reach that goal, and what are the job opportunities, job market look like in those fields? So one of these tools is the living wage calculator. You can plug in and see what the cost of living in your area is. I do think it underestimates a little bit because living in LA, I think it's a lot more than even this calculator shows. But another one is on California Career Zone. Actually, they have another budget tool where a youth can plug in the lifestyle they want. Do they want a cell phone? Do they want a car? Do they want to be able to do fun things? And then see how much money they would need to make. And then that can help them kind of backwards map to figure out what type of jobs they need to be ready for. And then another one is Salary Surfer. This is a great tool through the California community colleges. And what it does is it shows all these different fields that are out there. And then you can see all these different types of degrees or certificates in those fields. They have videos, so you can learn more about them. And then it also shows how much money you can make in those fields. So every time I look on there, I end up learning something new about all these kinds of like certificate programs where you can end up making pretty good money. So, you know, if you're doing this training with caregivers, I would normally recommend allowing them an opportunity to play around on these websites. So if you're doing this in person, have them pair up with someone. Most folks have smartphones and they can just go on the websites and poke around, and maybe one of them can pretend that there's a youth, the other one's a caregiver, thinking about how they might engage with the youth around doing these things together. Now, because we have a large audience today, I'm going to just demonstrate another website. But I think if you're doing this training virtually, you can also do a similar experience where you put folks into breakout rooms if you're using Zoom. And there's other platforms, of course, you can use besides Zoom. We just mentioned Zoom since it's the most common one. But, you know, you can do breakout rooms and have them interact with these websites. So I'm just going to show you real quick Salary Surfer as a fun tool. And you can see that up on the screen. So you can pick a program of study. Let's do computer and information science, something I know nothing about. And it'll show you all these different types of
I'm sorry, Jessica, I'm not seeing the...
Oh, it's not showing? Okay. That's funny. All right, let's go. Thank you. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I clicked on computer information science and it shows all these different types of sub-programs within that field and whether you get a degree or a certificate. And then you can watch videos to learn like, what's the difference between computer networking versus computer programming? And then it shows how much they can earn. So some youth, they might be motivated by money. So they might want to go in here and be like, which field can I make a good amount of money in? So like here, you can see there's a degree program where you can make like $75,000, or, you know, you can become a worldwide web administrator, get a certificate and make about $62,000. And then you click on these and then it shows you which community colleges offer these programs. And then you can click on the community college to learn more. So again, just another helpful tool for students to explore what options are out there. All right. Okay. So as you're doing these websites with youth, here's some tips on kind of how to navigate these conversations, because we definitely don't want to squash on anyone's dreams or tell them you can't do that. But there's a few things you can kind of keep in mind to help guide these conversations. You know, one is to use storytelling or any kind of personal anecdotes you have from your own experience to kind of help normalize any experiences. For example, a lot of youth might think that we just landed in the jobs we have today. They may not realize that for most of us, we probably had to start at some entry-level job. My first job was at Big Five Sporting Goods, and we had to work our way up to the careers that we have today. And so, you know, you can use examples like that, or maybe you got fired from your first job because you showed up late and you didn't realize that being 10 minutes late makes a difference. And some students might be surprised to learn that, being 10 minutes late or just not going to work on your birthday could be a reason you could get fired. And so, use some stories that you can share with them to help them understand your experiences, but also stick to the facts. I think when we can just give youth information about what's out there, they can use that information to help inform their own decision. And so it's not just you telling them what to do, it's, here, let me show you some information about these fields or these careers, and help inform them to be able to make these decisions for themselves. And lastly, think about asking questions instead of giving advice. We definitely don't want to give them bad advice that doesn't work out. And asking questions can kind of help them reflect on what's the right decision for them. And I think using that paced attitude and being curious and showing empathy can get them to reflect on what's important to them in this journey as well. So lastly, as you're having these conversations with youth and helping them explore their goals and their college pathways, it might be a good time to also set some goal setting with them and have them think about their short and long-term goals. Now, when we're talking about youth, we're not talking about 10-year goals because they're not going to be able to think that far in the future. We're talking about maybe short-term goals that week, maybe that semester, and a long-term goal might be what they need to do that school year to be able to be on track for their post-secondary education pathway. I think another thing that's important is just to let them know that it's normal, that there might be bumps along the way, there might be challenges, and that you want to proactively talk to the youth about when these challenges happen, what's going to motivate them and keep them going? What's going to help them have that drive? And who can support them along the way when these potential barriers might come up? I think for a lot of our youth who have experienced trauma, they might go into survival mode because of changes in their brain. They might have a really hard time even thinking about the future. And that's important to keep in mind as well, that sometimes they might just be focusing on safety. Their responses are automatic, defensive. So when they're in survival mode, they're going to have a hard time remembering these things. And so I think if you can proactively have them start to think about, like, when these challenges happen, who can I reach out to for support, can put together a good plan in place throughout the school year. And what's unique about our 11th and 12th graders is that when a youth turns 16, their social worker or probation officer is also required to sit with them to complete what's called a TILP. And that stands for the Transition to Independent Living Plan. It's a pretty simple document, but the youth outlines what their goals are, what activities they need to complete to reach their goal, who can help them along the way in each stage, and what the anticipated, timeline would be for those goals. So as a caregiver, it's just important to keep in mind that the social worker or probation officer is also ideally, hopefully, talking to the youth about their goals and doing this every 6 months. And so as you're thinking about the team and having good teaming, this can be a great way to kind of coordinate those conversations across the team about what their goals are and how the caregiver can play an active role in supporting them as well. So what are some of the education planning milestones that are unique for 11th and 12th grade? We've talked about that there's all these different pathways, but there are some critical steps that need to happen throughout high school and definitely in 11th and 12th grade to make sure that they're on the right pathway to reach those goals, whether they want to go to a community college or a four-year. And so what we're going to do is talk about what some of those steps are along the way to make sure that they can reach that goal. We're going to talk about some of the key steps, but just so you all know too, we have this guide, this Foster Youth Educational Planning Guide, and it's in the caregiver materials. It's also on our website. And this is a comprehensive guide. This includes a really long checklist of all the key steps, starting in 6th grade through 12th grade, as well as a summary on all the resources available at our California public colleges and universities. So we're going to hit on some of the high points today, but know that you do not need to memorize all of this information. This can be your reference guide as a caregiver to go back and see, okay, I've got a youth in this grade. What do they need to do? Are they on track? And this is a really youth-friendly guide too that they can also provide to the student. So just as a helpful tip before we dive into 11th and 12th grade, just know that every youth is different. They're, each on their own pathway. For many children in care, their developmental age or their emotional age isn't necessarily the same as their chronological age and grade level. So some steps need to be adjusted. Some youth might need more time, and just keep that in mind as you're helping them through this process. So let's start with 11th grade. A lot of the steps in 11th grade actually, build upon a lot of the steps that also happened in 9th and 10th grade. So if you took Ed Course 1, some of these steps are going to look familiar because they continue on in 11th grade. 12th grade, which we're going to spend the rest of the training on, is really where there's some very unique additional steps that happen in that grade. So there's kind of 3 categories. One is academics. And that's where we still want the young person, ideally with their caregiver, meeting with their academic counselor every semester, making sure that they're on track to graduation and that they're getting connected to supports if possible. And when the caregiver shows up and has these conversations with the counselor, with the student, I think it really shows that they care. And a lot of times, counselors may not be educated about youth in the foster care system, aware of the impact of trauma on that student, and may not encourage the student to really reach their full potential. And I think that's where a caregiver can really help advocate for the student as well, to make sure that they're really being pushed to their full potential and having the opportunity to take advantage of a lot of the resources that are out there too. Of course, just like in 9th and 10th grade, we still want to make sure in 11th grade that the student is in A through G courses, ideally. As we kind of mentioned before, A through G courses are a set of courses that are required by certain universities. So in California, our CSUs, our California State Universities, and our UCs, our University of California universities, require these courses. So there's all different subject areas from English to math and history, and it lists that each student needs a certain amount of courses completed with a passing grade in each of these subject areas. And the educational planning guide that I referenced on page 7, I believe, actually shows what all those courses are. So for students who are interested in pursuing a 4-year college degree directly out of high school, it's important that it's not just that they're in high school, but we want to make sure that they're also enrolled in the right classes if that's what their goal is as well. And of course, we just want them to continue to maintain regular attendance and seek tutoring if needed as well. But there's also a lot that can be done to help build students' college knowledge and readiness. For a lot of students, as we kind of mentioned earlier, right, they may not be familiar with what college is, not know much about it. Maybe they've never even visited a college campus. And so there's some things you can do to help expose them to college and also start getting them to think about where they see themselves. So one option is dual enrollment courses. These are classes that are, sometimes they're offered at the high school, sometimes they're offered at a local college, but they get dual credit for both high school class as well as college credit. Now, what's great about these is they've actually been proven to help increase high school graduation and college enrollment completion rates, particularly among low-income students, students of color, and even those with lower GPAs. So I think a lot of times our foster youth are not encouraged to take these dual enrollment courses, or they think, oh, that's just for, straight A students. But really, this could be a really good opportunity for even a student who's not doing well in school, because they might be more engaged in this class. They have all kinds of topics. They might be more motivated. It's also a great way to get them exposed to a college campus and start to build that familiarity with college while also getting additional credit as well. Of course, college tours. Ideally, we want them starting early on, middle school, early high school, but if they haven't done one yet, make sure they at least get one in 11th grade. And this helps to, one, expose them to what a college campus is, start to get them more familiar, help them envision themselves there. But 11th grade is also when they need to start thinking about where they want to attend. And so that's where those college tours also become really important. Some of the college tours out there are actually even just for foster youth. So in LA County, for example, our independent living program, which we'll talk more about, actually hosts a lot of college tours specifically for foster youth. So, they can talk to their child welfare agency or their high school to find out what might be going on in their community. Now, the other thing, this is unique for 11th grade, is if they're thinking about going to a 4-year, they should be encouraged to take either the SAT or ACT. These are standardized exams that are required by some colleges and universities for admissions. There is a fee to take these exams, but students, particularly youth in the foster care system, can usually get this fee waived if they just talk to their high school counselor. It's really recommended that they take this exam in 11th grade, because if they take it and they don't do well, it gives them more time to retake it again if they want to try and get a better score. Just to note about this, so currently the CSUs do require this exam, but the UCs no longer require this exam. This is pretty new. They felt like the exam was not equitable, so it's no longer required for the UCs, but the CSUs and some private schools do require this exam. As a facilitator, and this is in the trainer's notes, make sure to check the websites to see if anything's changed for the CSUs. I say this because with COVID, for example, last year, they actually told students that they did not need to submit these test scores. And so things can change. The future is unknown, but generally these are required. There's also a lot of test prep materials out there to help students study for these exams. There's also courses and classes they can get connected with. And some of these are free. So I would have the student talk to their high school counselor to find out what's being offered at their high school, but also connect with their independent living program. They can, talk to their social worker or probation officer to get connected, but there may also be funds to help with covering the costs of some of these classes. And then lastly, encourage students to join an academic enrichment program. So these are programs that usually happen outside of the traditional school hours that help encourage academics or college prep. And there's some programs out there just for students in general. And then there's also a lot of programs out there for foster youth specifically. LA in particular has a lot of these programs. And so we put together a resource guide, this LA County College Planning Resources, where you can get some of the contact information about some of these programs. If you're facilitating this training outside of LA County, you would take this part off of the screen, but I would definitely encourage you to create your own local contact information sheet for your caregivers about their local programs and how they can get connected. And then lastly, we want to continue as a parallel process to also support youth in career exploration and readiness. We already talked about how they can take career assessments, but they can also do this by signing up for electives, extracurriculars, volunteering. It's a way to help them start figuring out their interests, building skills, and getting more things on their resume. But 11th grade is also a great time for them to get a job, get a summer job or a paid internship, start building those skills so that they also are on a pathway to get the right degree they need, but also the right skills. So ultimately they can land a job and be job ready. So, to do that, they're going to need right to work documents like their ID or social security card or a green card if they're a permanent resident. And they'd have to get a work permit that their caregiver would have to approve on if they're under the age of 18. There's more details about this coming soon on this youth career guide, and we'll have that posted on the website as well. This is also done by our partners with the LA Opportunities Collaborative. But again, get them to start thinking about that summer job and start preparing early on so they can have this opportunity in that summer between 11th and 12th grade. So 12th grade, there's definitely some key steps regarding post-secondary education planning. But before we step into that, it's important that students are on track to graduate high school. And so there's something called AB 167-216. And why this is important is a lot of our youth in the foster care system change schools throughout their time in care. I think on average, students in the foster care system will change schools on average of 8 times while they're in care. And they say that they lose up to 6 months of education with every move. So all these moves really impact their educational outcomes. And it also makes it difficult for some students to complete high school graduation requirements. So given this law, AB 167-216, was put into place, and it says that foster youth, if they transfer high schools anytime after completing their 2nd year of high school, they're exempt from completing local graduation requirements if they're not able to reasonably meet those additional requirements within 4 years. And so basically they're exempt from taking or passing certain classes to allow them to graduate on time. So this doesn't mean that they can graduate early. They still graduate in 4 years. It just means they graduate in 4 years and they don't have to complete certain classes if maybe they were behind on. Students that choose this option, they actually receive the same type of graduation diploma as other students. But what's important to know though is if they do kind of opt to do these graduation exceptions, they're not going to be fulfilling those A through G requirements. So it's just important for students to be educated about that, because if they're thinking about going to a CSU or a UC, then it means they won't fulfill their A through G. Now, we'll talk a little bit later. There are sometimes admissions exceptions into the CSU system if students don't meet these minimum requirements, but it's not guaranteed and is not assumed. So we just want to make sure students are educated about that. If students are under the age of 18, it's their education rights holder that makes that decision if this is the right pathway for them. But caregivers, it's important for them to be aware of this because they can help, be part of that conversation with the youth. And we have a flyer on the slide that one of our partners at the Alliance for Children's Rights put together that kind of gives an outline and overview about these graduation rights for foster youth, as well as other K-12 high school education rights that they have as well. So 12th grade. They build upon many of the milestones that we talked about in 11th grade, but here are some additional unique things to keep in mind for 12th grade. We're going to talk about them kind of in broad strokes, and then we're going to dive into these throughout the training. So if they're thinking about a 4-year pathway, they either want to take or retake the SAT or ACT, and again, get that fee waiver from their high school counselor. It's really important though, that if they're thinking of taking or retaking the SAT, that they talk to their school counselor at the very beginning of the school year so they can find out when the exam dates are and register in advance, because there is a cutoff of when they need to take it in order to be included for their application for the CSUs. The other thing they want to do if they're thinking about, particularly a 4-year pathway, is start to figure out what majors they want and which colleges they want to apply to. And summer before 12th grade is a great time to start thinking about this. If students are thinking about going to a community college, they have a little bit more time We'll talk about it later, but students don't typically apply to community college until the spring semester of their senior year. Whoops, but 12th grade though this is where they apply to college. This is where they apply for financial aid. And this is also where we want to connect them to all of these campus-based support programs and resources that can help them through this process and also help them be successful once they're at a college campus. So we're going to take a break pretty shortly, but when we come back, that's where we're going to talk about all the nitty-gritty of applying to college, applying for financial aid, and really making sure that you're feeling comfortable about what all those resources are as well that students are eligible for.
I'm just, if I can chime in, Jessica. So if people have questions along the way, a lot of you are sending questions in through the chat, which is fine. But if you want to use the Q&A function rather than the chat function, that helps us to be able to keep track and make sure that we answered your question, and also allows all of the attendees to see the answer, because if you have the question, somebody else may as well. So feel free to use that Q&A function to send in questions rather than the chat if you're able to. Thanks.
Great. So it doesn't look like we have any unanswered questions right now, and that's fine. The second half of this training is definitely a lot more technical, and I think we might get more questions as we go through the training. So what we're going to do is take a 10-minute break. It's 11:25, so we're going to come back at 11:35 and we'll resume there. So I'll see you all in 10 minutes.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a nice break. We're going to go ahead and resume. So the next part of the training is a bit of an interactive exercise where we ask the caregivers to do some reflecting on how they feel about supporting youth with the college matriculation process. And a note for trainers, it's normal for students as well as adults to feel a range of feelings in relation to the college matriculation process. They might feel scared, confused, intimidated, overwhelmed, or they might feel confident or excited. So this is a great opportunity for caregivers to reflect on their own feelings about the process and help normalize their feelings. If you're in person, you can do this as a pair and share, where you ask participants to introduce themselves to the person sitting next to them and talk about the question and then share back with the group. You can also do like a post-it collage if you're in person, where you place post-it notes at each seat, and then audience members can go jot down their answers and put it on post-it notes on the wall, and the trainer can kind of cluster common responses and read them aloud. You can also do a poll of the audience, asking about typical feelings, like how many of you feel intimidated, how many of you feel nervous. But if you're on Zoom, like we are today, then you can use a technology like Mentee, which features a word cloud feature to be able to do this. So we're going to go ahead and demonstrate this. So I'm going to turn it over to Jessica to explain how to use the Mentee.
So hopefully you can see this on the screen right now. This is something you can log in by going to the website on the screen on mentee.com, and you can do this on your browser, on your computer, or on your smartphone. And if you go to that website link, then you type in the code that's listed on the slide, and this question should pop up. And Mentee, it's a great tool. You can use it for all different kinds of functions. We're showing one right now, which does a word cloud function where people will respond, and then the more common responses will show up in bigger font. But you can do quizzes and polls, and we'll show you some other ways to use it throughout the training today too. I will say, make sure you know your audience. I think for some folks, your training staff, maybe younger caregivers, they might think something like this is really fun and they might be really comfortable with it. If you're training an audience with a lot of elderly caregivers, this might be complicated to them. So, just kind of keep that in mind about what modality is going to be best for your audience. So let me, whoops. You guys should be able to start putting in your responses, hopefully. Okay, it should be open for you now to plug in. There we go. And can you still see the screen, Debbie?
Yep.
Okay, great. So people are putting in your feelings, right? Frustrating, challenging. Some people feel comfortable with it, feel confident with it. Some are kind of uncertain about the process.
So I'm not seeing the word cloud. I don't know if we're supposed to be seeing that right now, Jessica.
Oh, no.
I'm just seeing the question right now.
Oh, interesting. It's definitely showing on my end. Let me try to refresh here.
There we go.
Okay, great. Okay, so people are responding. Again, everyone just go to mentee.com on your phone or your web browser, type in this code and type in your response. Just make sure you feel comfortable using it too. So this is good. There's a range. Some people feel confident with the process and some people feel a little more confused with the process. And hopefully as we walk through it for today's training, you'll definitely feel more confident. And this is just to kind of keep in mind that youth might feel this way too. And so this is why it's so important that our youth get connected to support, because so many of them miss out on all these opportunities and resources because they do get frustrated and confused and overwhelmed. And some youth might shut down or be avoidant. And so it's important for caregivers to kind of be aware of what might be coming up, not just for themselves, but also for the youth. So as we can see, a range of different emotions here. All right, so we're going to do another activity on Mentee later on in the training. We'll be doing some quizzes. So you can just keep this browser open. When we get to the quiz, we're gonna use the same login and code. So we'll come back to this. So I'll give it back to you, Debbie.
All right, if we can go back to the PowerPoint.
Yes.
So the next thing I'm going to be talking about, as Jessica transitions us back, there we go. We can go to the next slide. So as we just talked about, students can feel scared, overwhelmed, confused, anxious about the process. And so youth may experience their stress in different ways during the process. It might manifest as avoidance or shutting down, not wanting to do the process. So it's really important to remain patient and encouraging and to continue to support you throughout the college application and well beyond. Just a note that a bill that passed a couple of years ago, Senate Bill 12, requires social workers and probation officers to identify a post-secondary support person to assist youth who are 16 or older with their financial aid applications. And so as the caregiver, that could be you. So it could be you or it could be somebody else, but it's really important that everybody have an adult in their life to be able to support them. Hopefully this training today will help to equip you with everything you need to be able to assist you through this process. All right, now we're really going to start getting into some of the nitty-gritty details. We do get pretty technical from this point forward, so put on your seatbelt. So I'm going to start with talking about the college application process. I'm going to start with the CSU and UC. So both of these systems have a selective admissions process, so it's important to know that the admissions requirements, acceptance rates, application process, costs, etc., are different between these two systems, even though they're both public systems. So for example, the UC system has a 3.0 minimum GPA, whereas the CSU system has a 2.0 GPA. And the links on the slide provide more information about the eligibility requirements and application process. So for those applying to a four-year college or university, it's best to start the summer before their senior year. For UC applications and many private institutions as well, they do require essays about like personal insight questions, autobiographical essays. And so students can get a head start on them over the summer. It's recommended that students have somebody to proofread and maybe help advise them on their essays before they submit them. There is a fee to apply to the universities, but students can receive fee waivers for up to 4 campuses each at the CSUs and UCs. And students will be automatically screened for whether they qualify for a fee waiver when they complete their application. Typically, foster youth are going to apply based on their income and household size. So for both of these systems, the deadline is November 30th. So that's a super important date to remember. If they're applying to a private college like USC, Loyola Marymount, they need to check the deadline for that particular campus. They do vary. If an application asks students about their foster care status, like, were you ever in the foster care system, we do encourage students to check the box and disclose their status, because that information is often used by colleges to do outreach to foster youth and make sure they're aware about special benefits or resources they might qualify for. Sharing this information does not impact their admissions in any way. When they're applying, students should also make sure to indicate if they want on-campus housing. Foster youth are eligible to receive priority consideration for housing at CSUs and UCs. Now, every campus has a slightly different process for how to verify status and get that priority. So students should reach out to the foster youth support program as well as the housing office to make sure that they get that priority. Even if a student isn't sure what their plans are for housing, they should go ahead and apply for housing early, as typically there's more students who want housing than it's available, and they can always decline housing if they decide later on they don't want to live on campus. I'm going to mention the EOP application as well. So for the CSU system, the EOP program, which is the Educational Opportunity Program, provides admission waivers. It provides academic and financial support to historically underserved students. And if students want to qualify for this program, they have to apply at the time of application. So this is really important. It's not something that they can apply to later. They have to do it with their admissions application. They do have to do a little bit extra for this. They have to write some essays. They have to provide contact information for 2 people to provide letters of recommendation. But we highly recommend that all foster youth apply for EOP. Just a little kind of tip about the EOP application is that it's the student's responsibility to ensure that the 2 recommendation letters are completed by the deadline. They won't receive any kind of confirmation email that it's been completed. So they have to stay on top of that with the people who they have put down as recommenders to make sure that they have completed that. As well, as I mentioned, similarly with the UC application, it's helpful for youth to have somebody to provide some support to them around writing the essays. And the other thing about EOP that's important to know is it's an admissions program in addition to a support program. So students who don't meet the minimum criteria for a CSU can apply through EOP and get admitted even if they don't meet the minimum criteria. So just because a student doesn't meet the minimum criteria, they should go ahead and apply through EOP as for a special admission status, and they still might be able to get in. Now, just note, with COVID-19 last year, the application deadline was extended. Things are continuing in flux. And so it's important if you're doing this training to just check on the application deadline for this year so that you can be providing up-to-date information. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to talk about what happens after admission to a UC or CSU. So of course, submitting the application is just the first step in the process. Once they're admitted, they have to decide what college they're going to attend. So they're probably going to want to consider the costs, how much financial aid is being offered when figuring out where to attend. And this is something that a student's going to probably need some support and guidance around making these decisions. And we're going to talk a lot more about financial aid in the next section. Once they decide where they want to attend, they usually need to submit what's called a statement of intent to register, saying that they want to attend the campus. If they qualify for priority on-campus housing, then they have to self-identify to the campus program to be able to access this benefit. Foster youth also get access to priority registration, which is a big help because a lot of times classes fill up. And so priority registration makes sure that foster youth can get the classes that they need. For CSUs, the criteria for priority registration is being in foster care after the age of 16 and under age 26. The UCs have a little bit more flexibility, so eligibility criteria can vary, and students should check with their campus support program to find out if they qualify for the benefit. Finally, in addition to applying for EOP, pretty much every campus except for one CSU now has a foster youth support program on campus. And so it's really important that students get connected to the foster youth support program. And we're going to provide some links at the end of the training for how they can look up contact information for foster youth support programs at every campus. So they want to make sure they get connected there as well. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about private colleges and universities, which we mentioned earlier can be a viable option because many of these do offer significant financial aid. Deadlines vary. They're often January 1st, but of course students want to check and make sure because they're not the same at every institution. A lot of colleges now use something called the Common App for their applications. So students can take a look at that and kind of get a sense of what's required to apply to a private institution. Some may require SAT or ACT scores, most require letters of recommendation. So they definitely want to plan well in advance to make sure that they are getting this done. And as I mentioned before, while they are more expensive, they can qualify often for institutional aid based on financial need and their personal statements or essays. So they shouldn't be deterred from applying. They can see what kind of financial aid they get and based on that decide whether it makes sense to go to one of those campuses. All right, if we go to the next slide, I'm going to switch gears again and start talking about community colleges, which is actually where 85% of foster youth do attend currently. So it's free to apply to a community college. There's no application fees like there are at the CSUs or UCs. All the community colleges use the same application, which is great. It's at the link that's shown there, cccapply.org. As we mentioned before, it's open access. And so no minimum GPA, no test scores, no essays, no letters of recommendation. You just fill out some basic information and apply. It can be a great backup option as well for students, who apply to a four-year college and maybe aren't accepted. And so just like with the CSU and UC applications, we encourage students to self-identify as a foster youth on the application. By doing that, they can get linked to resources that might be available specifically for foster youth. At community colleges, they also have a support program. It's called EOPS, which is similar to EOP, but different. One of the primary differences is that the application for EOPS is separate. It's not with the application, so they have to go apply for EOPS separately. We really encourage students to do this as early as possible because these programs do fill up, and once it's full, they won't be able to get admission. And we're going to talk about the support programs a little bit later, but EOPS can provide book vouchers, more robust academic counseling, linkages to tutoring, all kinds of different things like that. When students are applying for financial aid, most will qualify for a waiver of tuition or enrollment fees via something called the California College Promise Grant. And so this means that classes are free for them. They don't have to pay tuition. There are often some nominal fees like a student fee of $10 or $20 that aren't covered by the Promise Grant. So you want to make sure that students are paying those fees. And one thing to know about the Promise Grant is that foster youth can maintain it regardless of academic performance. So even if they're struggling in their classes, sometimes they may lose other forms of financial aid. I'm going to talk about that more in the financial aid section, but there's this very unique, regulation specifically for foster youth in relation to the Promise Grant that they don't lose it, which is great. Lastly, students have to enroll in their classes, and there's a few things they need to do before they can enroll in classes if they want to access priority registration, which is also available at the community colleges. So they have to complete an orientation, an assessment, and do an ed plan before they can access priority registration. So again, you want to make sure that they are taking the time to do that, starting the process early. One of the complaints that we hear from colleges is that students show up, over the summer and they say, hey, I'm here, I'm ready for college. And at that point, it's kind of pretty late in the game. So we really want to get them started during the spring of their senior year at the very latest. Ideally, they'll get started in this process during the fall. Okay, so we're going to do a quiz now. So I'm going to ask Jessica to go ahead and switch us over to Mentee.
Sure, one sec.
And I see that there was a question about how we ensure that youth receive priority registration. And they need to provide, typically they'll need to provide evidence that they were in foster care to the Admissions and Records Office. And the Foster Youth Support Program, if one is available on the campus, can help with that. So they should talk to the Foster Youth Support Program and or the Admissions and Records Office to make sure that they get access to priority registration.
And we're going to show too, as we move through the training, we have a website that keeps track of all the different contact information for all these different foster youth support programs at the different colleges in California, because I know someone had asked if we had a list, and so we'll share that website with you too, so you can get that information. So we're going to do another activity on Mentee, just another tool for you to potentially use. So I see many of you have already joined. We're going to be using a quiz function on Mentee. So we're going to have a series of questions to test your knowledge over the section we just went over regarding applying to college. So again, go to mentee.com on your phone or your web browser. If you're already logged in, use the same link and same code. Looks like we got about 26 of you. Give you all a few seconds. More of you are logging in. We are going to have a prize for this quiz. And so what this is going to do is going to have a leaderboard. You get points for not only answering the question correctly, but also answering it the quickest. And so at the end, it will show a winner. And that winner, if you don't mind, once you win, if you put in the chat function your email address, and we will email you a $20 e-gift card to Amazon. So pay attention, folks. All right, we got a lot more of you logged in. I'm just going to give you a few more seconds because I know we're still kind of getting used to the new platform, but I should prompt you to create a little username for the quiz. And we are going to start.
Just as a reminder, the code there is at the top.
Yes.
And I'll go ahead and type it into the chat for everybody right now as well.
Thank you. Oh, great. Got a few more folks who logged in. Yep.
Yeah, because you announced the prize. Now everybody's logging in.
I'll sign in. Okay. Amazon. Get anything you need delivered to your door. Oh, yeah, there we go. Okay, I'm going to give you guys just a few more seconds. You're still trickling in. All right, here we go. Don't worry about that question. Let's see, start countdown.
And the faster you answer, the more points you get.
All right, so students can receive a fee waiver at up to how many CSUs and UCs? All right, the correct answer is 4, up to 4 waivers at CSUs and 4 at the UCs. Rosalba looks like is in the lead. Go, Rosalba. All right, here we go. Next question.
Get points for speed.
To access priority registration at the community college, students must meet the priority deadline set by each college, be in care on or after their 16th birthday to be eligible, complete, oh, you guys already, oh, that was quick. All right, that went a little quicker. We're going to adjust the countdown timer when we do this next time. But the answer is all of the above to access priority registration. All right, Rosalba in the lead. Next question.
Looks like people are having some issues with the quiz. I'm not sure.
All right, well, pros and cons with technology here. All right, here we go. Students should be encouraged to apply to private colleges or universities. True or false?
Students should not be encouraged.
Excuse me, students should not be encouraged to apply to private colleges or universities. All right. Correct answer is false. We definitely want to encourage them if they want to go to apply to private college or university, see what's best for them.
And just to clarify, we don't want to encourage them to attend a private proprietary college, but a nonprofit college or university, absolutely.
Okay. Who's in the lead? Oh, Rosalba's still in the lead. All right. Here we go. Last question. Oh, geez. Hold on, hold on. There we go. To apply for EOPS at the California community colleges, students must, either they do not need to complete a separate application, they must apply at the same time as completing their CCC apply, or they have to submit a separate application and space is limited. Correct answer is they have to submit a separate application for EOP&S at the community colleges. Whereas at our CSUs, the EOP program application is embedded within the CSU application. All right. Our winner is oh, it's calculating. Oh, bingo, came out from somewhere. You're our winner. So shoot us your email and we'll make sure you get that gift card.
Right.
Just as a tip, just learning for myself as well, I set the timer for each question at 15 seconds and I realized that was a bit rushed. So if you were to do this, I'd recommend more time for someone to respond to each question. You can set how much time they have for each question on this as well. All right.
So apologies for anybody. I see some people got kicked out of Mentee and such. So apologies for that. It's not a perfect system, but it seems like most of you were able to use it, which is great. All right. So that is it for the application section. I know it's a lot of detail, but it is a complicated process. So if we can go to the next slide. We're going to talk about paying for college. All right, so we know that going to college can be expensive, but there are a lot of resources available to foster youth that can make it affordable and attainable. So I'm going to give you an overview about the importance of financial aid, how to apply it, and how to keep it. It can be confusing and sometimes overwhelming for students, so it's really helpful to be aware of some of the basics of this process so that you can provide them with support and guidance. All right, so first, just to note that financial aid, not surprisingly, really makes a huge difference in whether students are successful in college. High school seniors who complete the Fafsa are 63% more likely to enroll in higher education than those who don't. And a study done of California community college students found that of those who received at least $7,500 in financial aid, 63% of them transferred or graduated, whereas students who received between $1,000 and $2,000, 17% transferred or graduated. So big difference there that financial aid can make. So if we go to the next slide, what do we mean when we talk about financial aid? There are several subcategories of financial aid. So the best type of financial aid is gift aid. This is free money that does not have to be repaid as long as the student upholds their part of the bargain and attends class and makes adequate progress towards graduation. This is typically either a grant or a scholarship. Sometimes this can be given out on a one-time basis, or it might be renewable over the course of a few years. There's also fee waivers, like we talked about the Board of Governors, the California College Promise Grant, formerly known as the Board of Governors fee waiver, that provides free access to community college. The second type of aid is work study. This provides paid part-time jobs for students, allows them to earn money to help pay their education expenses. Often these jobs are on campus. They can relate to a student's major or career interests. Like with any other job, they earn their money as they work. So this can be a great way for students to not just get funds, but also develop work experience and time management skills. These funds, of course, do not need to be paid back. And then, unlike grant aid or work study, there are loans which do need to be repaid, typically with interest. Now, a lot of students are discouraged from getting loans for very understandable reasons. However, in some cases, student loans can be a positive investment, unlike other types of debt, like credit card debt. This is something that will pay off in the long run. Loans should be a last resort after other types of aid are sought. And it's a complicated system. It's going to be really important for students to get help and do the research to understand the different kinds of loans and interest rates and repayment schedules and those types of things, so that there's they really know what they're getting themselves into when they take out a loan. Where does this aid come from? Federal government is the biggest source of financial aid. They offer grants like the Pell Grant, work study, and loans. California also offers a lot of financial aid. So like the Cal Grant, which helps pay tuition costs at the universities. Colleges and universities themselves often offer institutional aid. So in addition to the government aid, institutions may offer grants and scholarships. And lastly, there's, thousands, literally thousands of community groups, organizations, private companies, et cetera, that offer scholarships beyond just what you can get from government sources. Some are based on financial need. There's some that target specific ethnic groups or award scholarships based on special talents, academic performance, leadership ability, life experience. So this is another great source for additional money. So when youth are asked about whether they think it's possible for them to go to college, if we can go to the next slide, they often say no because they don't think that they can afford it. And the good news is that there's actually a lot of financial aid with proper planning and advanced work. There's a lot of financial aid that foster youth qualify for. So we're not going to describe all of the different types of financial aid in this training, but this gives you kind of a snapshot of the different types of aid and the amounts that are available. So these numbers are based on the 2020-2021 school year, so the school year that just ended. So please, note that amounts change. So when you're delivering this training, this is a slide that you're probably going to want to go in and just make sure that the amounts are current for the current school year and update them as needed. But as you can see, at all three of our systems, CSU, UC, and community colleges, there's anywhere from $22,000 to $27,000 available. $35,000. So $22,000 to $35,000 available in financial aid, and this doesn't include private scholarships. So there may be even more than this available to students who take the time to apply for private scholarships. What this also doesn't include is if a student is parenting, if they have dependents, they can qualify for up to an additional $6,000 in Cal Grant funding. So for parenting students, add $6,000 to these total. Now, one thing I just want to note for you all is that the second line there, you see the Cal Grant Access Award, which pays for non-tuition costs like food, housing, books, etc. And it says that up to $6,000 is available. That's kind of a hot off the press item that literally was passed in the budget this week. So this is a brand new source of financial aid for foster youth specifically, there's now a foster youth Cal Grant augmentation where they can get up to $6,000 of extra money. So that is super exciting. So if we go to the next slide, what does it take to make sure that a student can get all of this aid? There's basically 3 steps. So it feels overwhelming and confusing, but when you start to break it down, you know, it can feel much less overwhelming. So first is completing the Fafsa or the CATA. So the CATA is the California Dream Act application. I'm going to talk more about when a student needs to fill that out. It's primarily for undocumented students. Most students are going to fill out the Fafsa, but if they don't meet the citizenship or residency requirements for the Fafsa, they would do the CATA. This can take anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour to fill out. Then they would need to do a Chafee grant application. This is a separate application for the Chafee grant, which can get them additional $5,000. It's a very simple application, only takes about 5 to 10 minutes. And the last step is creating a web grants account. I'm going to talk more about why this is important, but it's a simple process, takes 5 to 10 minutes. So usually it's good to set aside an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes or so to make sure you can get through all of these steps with a young person. So if we go to the, okay, great. So how does one do this? We are not going to go through all of the steps to fill out the Fafsa. There's many questions on the Fafsa, but I'm going to highlight some resources that we have available. What's really most important is that youth are connected to an adult supporter to assist them in this process. We at JBay have prepared a financial aid guide for California foster youth. And this walks them through step-by-step every question and how to fill it out as a foster youth. There's also an accompanying what we call a visual guide, which actually shows screenshots from the Fafsa with tips saying, here's how you answer this question, here's how you answer this question, etc. The financial aid guide has a bunch of other information as well about the different kinds of financial aid and steps to follow, etc. We also have a webinar that we do every year and post on our website that is a pre-recorded webinar that provides an in-depth training that walks through step-by-step how to complete the Fafsa. So there's a lot of resources that are available. Lastly, we have the after the Fafsa checklist. Completing the Fafsa is only the first step in the process. There's a bunch of other stuff students have to make sure that they do to make sure that their financial aid is processed and that they get the money. Things do change with the financial aid process, so it's important to check back at the link that's provided there on the slide every year to ensure you're using the most recent version. We do update all of this, the financial aid guide, the visual guide, and the webinar every year because things do change every year. In 2023, the Fafsa is going to go through a complete overhaul, so you want to make sure that you're using the most recent version of these materials. All right, so how do you apply for financial aid? So there's 2 applications depending on a person's citizenship status. If the applicant is a US citizen, permanent resident, or other eligible non-citizen, they complete the Fafsa. That stands for the free application for federal student aid. They can do that on the federal student aid website, or there is now an app called My Student Aid that they can go to. So we've got the link for the website there, and they can download the app called My Student Aid. Or if they're an eligible undocumented immigrant, then they can complete the California Dream Act application, the CATA instead, and the website is there as well. And if they're not certain about which one they should apply for, they can go to that CATA website, and there's a questionnaire there that can help them determine their eligibility. If a student applied for DACA and has a temporary Social Security number and work permit through DACA, they do need to do the CATA application. So they're not, unfortunately, eligible for federal aid. They can't do a Fafsa. One thing to just note is that a couple things. One is that DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, but it is sometimes kind of referred to as Dream Act. And so that is totally different than the California Dream Act, which is specifically for financial aid. So don't get those 2 different things confused. Also, the California Student Aid Commission keeps all CATA applicant data confidential. It is never disclosed to any federal agency, including immigration enforcement. I'm sure people are going to have questions or concerns about that, but it is completely confidential. If you do have students who don't qualify to complete the FAFSA, if we can go to the next slide. This is not related specifically to college, but it's important for caregivers to understand that those youth should be, the child welfare agency should be applying for what's called special immigrant juvenile status, which some of you might be familiar with. This is a status that undocumented children who are involved in adoption or guardianship proceedings or who have been abandoned, abused, or neglected might be able to obtain this SIJS status, which allows them to become a lawful permanent resident. In other words, they can get a green card. And once they get a green card, then they can submit a FAFSA. And of course, it opens up all kinds of other benefits as well. So if a student has a pending application for SIJS, they can't submit the FAFSA. They still have to submit the CATA. But once they get that SIJS status, then they can submit a FAFSA. If there's an undocumented student who does not have an application for SIJS pending, then the caregiver should contact the child welfare agency immediately to screen them for eligibility and find out what's going on, because that referral typically has to happen before the youth turns 18. So I do see a question in the chat about whether the FAFSA and CATA aid amounts are the same. Unfortunately not. If you submit through the CATA, you don't get access to federal aid. So the state aid amounts are the same, whether you submit a FAFSA or a CATA. So the Cal Grant program, the Board of Governors fee waiver, the Chafee Grant program is actually eligible to both as well. So those amounts are all the same, but because you can't get the federal aid, things like the Pell Grant, that that's a federal program, obviously wouldn't be available to those students, unfortunately. Okay, so if we go to the next slide, so that's how you apply. And then just to kind of give you a very kind of high level, big picture overview of how the school then determines how much aid a student qualifies for. It's a pretty simple formula. Basically, the school looks at the cost of attendance. So how much does it cost to go here? And that's a standard amount that colleges use. So they add up, this is what tuition is, and this is how much we think housing should cost, and how much food should cost, et cetera, and books and all of that. And then they say, what do we expect the family to contribute? And so that's based on the income of the student or the family who submitted the application. So they look at their income and they say, okay, this is how much we think the family can afford to pay. With most foster youth, this is going to be 0. And then they subtract what the family or individual can pay from the total cost of attendance, and that's their eligibility for need-based aid. And so if the cost of attendance is $25,000 and the expected family contribution is 0, then their eligibility is $25,000. Now that doesn't mean they're going to get $25,000, because not that, that amount of aid might not be available, but they are eligible for up to that amount of aid, coming from things like the Cal Grant, the Pell Grant, Chafee Grant, those types of sources. So if we go to the next slide, and then I'll just say that the financial aid office will then provide information to the student about what they qualify for based on that calculation. So when to apply? The priority application period is October 1st to March 2nd of before the start of the school year that college will begin. So for example, if somebody is thinking about applying to college for fall, not this fall, but fall of 2022, the FAFSA will open for them on October 1st of this year. So they can apply, they can submit their FAFSA almost a full year before college starts. And then March 2nd is the priority deadline for state aid. Now, if somebody misses the March 2nd deadline, they absolutely should still be encouraged to apply. There's a lot of sources they can still get, the Pell Grant and the Chafee Grant. And if they're at a community college, they can still get the Cal Grant, but they might receive less money, in particular if they're attending a four-year university. So the earlier, the better in terms of applying for financial aid. Some sources are first come, first serve as well. So again, earlier they can apply, the better. Even if they don't know where they plan to go to college, even if they don't know whether they plan to go to college. What we encourage people to tell students is on that October 1st start date, go ahead and fill out a FAFSA. If you decide not to go, nothing lost. You can just say, I decide not to go to college. I don't need the financial aid after all. but there's no disadvantage to applying early. All right, the next slide. So what do students need to submit their financial aid application? Once they determine which application they're going to complete, the Fafsa or the CATA, there are a few things they need. Whether you as a whether the caregiver helps the students to fill out the application, or they're connected to a local workshop or their independent living program, caregivers can make sure that students have the necessary information. They will need to know their social security number or alien registration number if they don't have a social security number for the Fafsa. They also need to make sure they know their name exactly as it appears on their social security card. If they're filling out the CATA, it's recommended they have their statewide student identifier number, their SSID. It's not required, but it's helpful, and students can get this from their high school counselor. They do need an email address that they check often. We encourage them to set up a Gmail address or something, not to use a high school email address because that may expire and they won't be able to get the information. And all of the information comes to that email address. It's really important that they're checking that email address. They have to have a list of up to 10 colleges. They can just put one college down, or they can put up to 10, and it can be updated at any time. So if they really have no idea where they want to go, they can just put the local community college for now and then update it when they get a better sense of where they actually are going to be applying. And lastly, they need to have their tax information for what's called the prior year. Now, for many of these students, they probably weren't working. They don't have tax information. If they've never worked a day in their life, that makes it easier. There's no income information that they need to provide. But if they did work, they will need to report any income. Even if they didn't have enough income to file taxes, they still need to report any income they heard from their part-time jobs. So this concept of prior year, basically, if somebody's planning on attending school, say in 2021, 2022, so they're about to start this coming fall, their eligibility would have been based on their income from 2019. So not the year before, which would be 2020, but 2 years before, 2019. So they're going to need to have information about their income. If they did file taxes, it's actually much easier because they can just link to the IRS and the information gets automatically uploaded. But if they didn't file taxes because their income was low, then they'll have to have their W-2s available so they can provide information about that income. All right, so next slide. We're not going to go through, as I said, all the questions on the Fafsa, but there is one question that I wanted to highlight here, which is that current or former foster youth may qualify for what's called independent student status. And this is for both the Fafsa or the CATA, if they can answer yes to any part of these two questions that you see on the screen. So question one, at any time since you turned 13, were both your parents deceased? Were you in foster care? Or were you a dependent or ward of the court? And foster care, dependent, ward of the court, different terms are used in different states. They all mean the same thing. So for our purposes, it's just, were you in foster care after the age of 13? Or does someone other than your parent or step-parent have legal guardianship of you? So if a student is in a legal guardianship, they also qualify for independent status. What does that mean? It means that that student does not need to provide any income information for parents. And so they are just providing income and asset information about themselves, which this is why most foster youth have an expected family contribution of 0, because their own individual income is typically very low or even 0, and they don't have to worry about getting information from their parents. They also don't have to provide information from foster parents or anybody else. It's just based on their own income. There's other groups that can qualify for independent status. If somebody's married, if they have children, if they're in the military, all of those automatically qualify youth for independent status. So some foster youth might qualify within more than one category. It's really important that students are educated about this question because it is one that people do get confused about.
And I just wanted to add too that when they're talking about being a dependent or ward of the court, They're talking about youth that are in out-of-home care. So some youth might be involved in the foster care system, but still remain in the legal custody of their parents. For the purposes of the Fafsa, they're not considered a ward of the court. It's really youth that were, removed from their home at least one day after the age of 13 that would qualify for this criteria for independent status.
Great. Yes, thank you for clarifying that. So the next slide, a couple of other considerations for foster youth. Foster youth do not have to report any income from extended foster care, AB 12 benefits, otherwise known as SILP payments. Even when those SILP payments are sent directly to the youth, they are not considered income and don't have to be reported anywhere on the FAFSA. They do not reduce the student's eligibility in any way for financial aid. If the student is parenting and they receive the infant supplement, that also does not need to be reported. If the youth is receiving supplemental security income, SSI, or disability benefits, that is also exempt as income and does not need to be reported on the FAFSA. Finally, foster youth should self-identify on the FAFSA. There's a question there that says, are you a foster youth or were you at any time in the foster care system? And we do recommend that they answer yes. It doesn't impact their financial aid eligibility in any way, but it is a way to make sure that they're getting connected to any benefits and resources that they might qualify for at their campus. Just to note, most of the questions on the FAFSA and the CATA are the same. This is one difference. This foster youth question is only on the FAFSA, not on the CATA. So that's step one, submitting the FAFSA or the CATA. That's definitely the most cumbersome step. Step two, applying for the Chafee grant is much simpler. There's a link there on the slide for the online application. It qualifies students to receive up to $5,000 for up to 5 years until the age of 26. This is funding that can be used for non-tuition costs. So it can be used for tuition, but it can also be used for books, housing, transportation, childcare, etc. It can be used in-state and it can be used out of state. It can be used a 2-year program, a 4-year program, a CTE program. So it's a very flexible funding source. In order to qualify, a student has to have been a dependent or ward of the court between the ages of 16 and 18, meaning they were placed in out-of-home care. So if they were unified, were adopted, entered guardianship before the age of 16, they don't qualify for a Chafee grant. The grant is also dependent on financial need. They have to be enrolled at least half time. There's some other requirements like that. It's all listed on that website there that we posted. It is a separate online application, but it's pretty simple. It should only take about 10 to 15 minutes. There's an automatic verification that happens with the Child Welfare Agency, so they don't have to worry about submitting proof that they were in foster care. That'll happen automatically. Also, while the FAFSA or CATA has to be submitted every year, this Chafee grant application, it's a one and done deal. Once they've submitted it 1 year, they don't ever have to submit it again. They can continue to receive the award after that. And then the last step that we mentioned before is creating a Web Grants for Students account. And again, we provide the link there for where a student would go. They should do that after their FAFSA or CATA has been processed. So it can take up to 2 weeks for this to happen. It allows them to manage all of their California state financial aid. So that includes the Chafee grant as well as the Cal grant. They can see how much they've received. They'll be notified of any further actions they need to take, like if they need to provide additional verification or any other paperwork. And once a student determines which school they plan to attend, it's really important that they log into Web Grants and indicate their planned school so that the funds are sent to the right place. We definitely have seen where that information is wrong and the funds go to the wrong school and then the student doesn't get access to them, and it's kind of a whole thing to get the funds redirected to the correct school. So better that that information is just up to date from the get-go. In addition, in Web Grants, a student can look to see that their GPA has been received. So for the Cal grant, and that's the source that I just shared, foster youth can get an extra $6,000 for. So it's more important than ever, and that is the source that pays the tuition costs for a student going to a CSU or UC. There are high school GPA requirements, and the high school has to submit the GPA to the Student Aid Commission. It's supposed to happen automatically, but sometimes it doesn't, especially if a student has changed schools. And so a student can go into Web Grants and just make sure that their GPA is in there. And if it's not, you know, to take steps to make sure that it gets submitted. And this will ensure that they're accessing all the financial aid that they are eligible for. And then one of the resources that we have available, and there's a link there, is the After the Fafsa checklist, because again, as I said before, the Fafsa is only the first step in the process. So that After the Fafsa checklist offers some additional instructions about the GPA verification process that I just mentioned, and some of the other steps that we're not going to go into a lot of detail about here today that a student needs to take. So make sure that you direct caregivers to visit this link to download these resources. So that's how you get your financial aid. I'm just going to say a couple quick words about keeping financial aid, because with the exception of loans, financial aid doesn't have to be repaid as long as the student holds up their end of the bargain. Oftentimes students are told things like this is free money, which is true, but they don't necessarily realize that there are conditions attached in order for them to be able to keep that money. One of those conditions is something called satisfactory academic progress, or SAP. And basically what this says is that students have to complete a certain number of their classes, they have to have a certain minimum GPA, and they have to complete in a certain time frame in order to maintain eligibility for financial aid. And in some cases, if a student like drops a class or something like that, they can actually be asked to, not only do they lose their aid, in certain circumstances, they're asked to repay aid that they got previously. And so this is a really important thing for students to understand. If we go to the next slide. And some new research that we're going to be actually releasing in a couple of weeks on a webinar on the 22nd found that over 1/3 of foster youth failed to make SAP within their first year of college. For African-American foster youth, that rose to 42%. So a lot of our students are not making SAP. Now I'll say that the rate for all students is 25%. So, you know, there's a lot of students in general who aren't making SAP, but it's higher for foster youth. And so it's really important that we understand this. And, you know, students who fail to make SAP are significantly more likely to disenroll from college. And, you know, we know that SAP is one of the major contributing factors to why 48% enroll in college, but only 11% actually graduate, because they do lose their financial aid. So it's important for caregivers to understand, number one, how to educate students about these policies so that they know that this is a thing, and that students are connected to resources early on so that they can maintain that GPA, they can maintain the courses, you know, if they need to drop a class, that they're really understanding what the implications are going to be. We really advise that students always talk to a counselor and talk to the financial aid office before dropping any classes, so they understand all of the implications of doing that. They often just feel like, oh, this class is really hard, I'm just going to drop it. They don't think about sort of what that might mean. All right, and so just one last word about financial aid is, we know that financial aid makes a difference. We know that foster youth qualify for a range of financial aid. However, we also know that many foster youth still struggle to access financial aid. So you can see from this chart that, you know, about 85% of foster youth are getting California College Promise Grant, 63% of those same students are getting a Pell Grant, and only 20% are getting a Cal Grant. And we know that that difference between the Promise Grant and the Pell Grant, a lot of that's just getting the FAFSA done, because you don't actually have to do a FAFSA to get the fee waiver, whereas you do have to complete the FAFSA process to get a Pell Grant. And so, you know, we want to make sure that they're getting that FAFSA done. One of the barriers for the Cal Grant is that GPA verification. If that GPA verification doesn't happen, then they're not going to get that Cal Grant either. So, you know, some of that upfront work can really pay off in the long run. All right, quiz, another quiz.
All right, so this will be another opportunity to test your knowledge, practice what we've learned. You just learned a lot about financial aid, and another opportunity to win a $20 e-gift card to Amazon. I will note too, we have the resources to provide gift cards, but get creative. We've seen some facilitators partner with their local community colleges and get, free college swag donated. So if you were doing this training maybe in person, you could raffle off a hat from your local college or something like that. So if you don't have the means to do gift cards, I think there are other ways to do quizzes or fun games and still provide prizes that are fun for the attendees. So I'm going to try Mentee again. Let me switch my screen here. Okay. And this is what it looks like behind the scenes. So for this quiz, we're going to use a different code. So Debbie, if you wouldn't mind putting the code into the chat for folks. So again, go to mentee.com, log in, type in that code, click enter, and then should give you an opportunity to create a little username. Give everyone a few seconds to log in. All right, another moment here. And again, you get points for answering correctly and for speed. All right, give you a few more seconds, see folks are logging in. We've got about 50 of you. All right, and again, we're going to start. If you're having a hard time logging in, the information's in the chat. Go to mentee.com and put in the code in the chat. All right, here we go. Oops, let's see, here we go. All right. Eligible undocumented students must fill out which financial aid application? Correct answer is CADA, the California Dream Act application. Who do we got in the lead here? Someone new this time. Iridian. Question 2. Looks like it's loading. The priority deadline to apply for financial aid is no deadline, March 2nd, November 30th, or June 1st. Correct answer is March 2nd is the priority deadline. Now, of course, students can apply after that deadline. If they're going to a 4-year, they'll definitely receive less money, but they still can be eligible for some funding. And we've got Iridian in the lead, and I'm probably mispronouncing that. All right. Question 3. When filling out the Fafsa or California Dream Act, resource parents do not count as parents. True or false? All right. True, they do not count as parents on the Fafsa or California Dream Act. Who do we got in the lead? Oh man, Iridian's still in the lead. All right, question 4. Eligible foster youth may receive an additional $5,000 in grant funding if they do nothing, they're just auto-enrolled into the Chafee Grant program, or complete a separate application for the Chafee Grant, or just simply participate in extended foster care. The answer is they must complete a separate application to receive the Chafee Grant, to receive up to an additional $5,000 in grant aid. Who we got? Homer's close. Homer's second place here. Maybe Homer will make a comeback at the next. Oh no, Homer went down a few, sorry. All right, 2 more. We want to make sure you really get the financial aid. I think it's the hardest part of the training. A critical step after receiving a Web Grants for Students account is indicating if you will have on-campus housing, uploading your SAT, ACT scores, or verifying that your high school GPA was received. Correct answer is verifying that your high school GPA was received. All right, Reading in the lead. Last question. Satisfactory academic progress is passing enough classes along the way, completing in a reasonable time, completing with a high enough GPA, all of the above, or none of the above. Three, two, one. Correct answer is all of the above. Those are 3 key steps that they need to do to maintain their financial aid once they've received it. So our big winner is, oh, someone new. We got, oh, ECB. Whoever you are, ECB, congratulations. Please send us your email address in the chat and we will send you a gift card. All right. So let me get out of this and we'll go back to our PowerPoint. All right. Okay. So now that we've covered that, we're going to transition to a new topic, which is about how we can really set up our foster youth for college success. And one moment, let me get this set up here. So the good news is that there's a lot of resources out there that our youth can tap into. Some of these resources are just for foster youth, some are just for students in general. But what's really important as a caregiver is to be aware of these resources and let youth know, because this can be motivating to them too, to know that there's support that can help them through this. The reason I think it's really critical that we have these conversations with youth early on is that we want to prevent summer melt. If you're not familiar with summer melt, what this is this thing that happens is when high school students apply to college, they're actually accepted into college, but they fail to enroll in the fall semester after high school. Some studies show that anywhere from like 10 to 40% of college attending students actually fail to enroll, and particularly around low income students or first generation students. But a lot of times in that summer, they may not have resources or supports or really clear guidance. And there might be key follow-up steps that need to happen along the way, and they might just simply fall through the cracks. So that's why we really want to be proactive in getting youth connected to whatever resources are at their college early on, ideally before they graduate high school. And some of these programs will even help youth with the college application. So they could be a good resource to help them through that process early on, or at least get them connected over the summer before they start school. But we want to be proactive and not reactive. So we don't want to just connect them once there's a crisis, but do it early on. So like if they're going to be, we think they might have certain subjects that maybe they're going to struggle with in school, or mental health might be a barrier, like getting them connected to these resources ahead of time to really make it a smooth transition is what's ideal. And we want it to be a warm handoff. So we don't just want to give a youth a name or a number. That's usually not enough when it comes to youth in the foster care system. I'm sure as many of you know, a lot of them have experienced trauma, and they might have a hard time forming a new relationship with a new person and a new program at a new school in a new city. That can be intimidating, can feel overwhelming, and they just might be more hesitant to build yet another new relationship. And so I think anything that a caregiver can do to make that transition easy, maybe scheduling a phone call or a Zoom call together with the student in the program, going with them in person to meet the program, just so the student feels more comfortable and connected. There's a lot of programs at college campuses just for foster youth. One of them is the Foster Youth Success Initiative, FYSI. Essentially, there's a foster youth liaison at every California community college. A lot of times they're housed in the financial aid office, so this could be a good resource as well. There's also the Next Up program. Used to be called CAFES, so you might hear both names. And this is a support program specifically just for foster youth housed within the EOP&S program. It's not at every community college, it's only at about 45 throughout the state, but if the community college has it, definitely get the student connected to this program. They do have to meet certain eligibility, like being in care on or after their 16th birthday, being under the age of 26, but they can provide additional supports, advising, financial resources, and things like that. And then in addition to that, most of our schools in California are CSUs, UCs, community colleges, even some of our private schools have these other foster youth specific campus support programs. Now, they're privately funded usually, so they all kind of go by different names. They have different eligibility criteria. The Next Up program, it's a state funded program, so it looks the same pretty much at all the colleges that have it. But these programs vary. A lot of times they might go by the name Guardian Scholars, but they all have, own names that their own program came up with. And so definitely, get youth connected to these programs as well as another resource and support. In addition to the foster youth specific programs, there's a lot of other just general resources at college campuses that students can tap into. Now, we mentioned the EOP and EOP&S program. Again, encourage students to apply for that. A lot of great resources. There's also the CalWorks and Care program. This is for parenting students. This is at our community colleges. And, for those parenting students that are receiving public benefits, they can get additional resources, help with childcare, things of that nature. Also, across all of the systems, all the colleges have some amount of counseling and psychological services, which can be a good resource for students. School can just be stressful in general, and so that can be another place of support for them. There's also student disability services, and this is really important. This, again, is across all of our public schools. Students can get special accommodations in college as well, but the difference is in college, they have to self-identify. So in high school, students with disability, they probably didn't have to proactively seek out these services. They had adults advocating for them to make sure they get connected to these resources. In college, it's a bit of a shift. They're going to have to self-identify what their needs are and proactively go to the office to seek services. but it can be really helpful. They can get extra test taking time. Maybe they have anxiety. They can be in a quiet environment. They can get interpreters, assistive technology, assistance with note taking, and they can get it for students that have physical disabilities, learning disabilities, mental health disabilities. And if a student has, for example, an IEP, an individualized education plan, they can often start by even just bringing that into the office to get an accommodation, or if they don't have documentation, a lot of times the schools will help with doing assessments as well. Additionally, unfortunately, a lot of students struggle with basic needs, food insecurity, homelessness, and this is pretty new. Our colleges, the CSUs, UCs, and community colleges, now, due to some recent funding, actually have basic needs centers where they can get connected to resources such as those. A lot of our college campuses have tutoring, as well as cultural programming, student clubs. There might be programs for students who identify as Latinx or African American. So there's many other opportunities for students to get connected to support. Rising Scholars is actually for students who have a history of being impacted by the criminal justice system. Not all colleges have this program, but many do. And then many colleges also have Dream Centers. These are programs and centers dedicated for their undocumented students. And another great resource could be the College Promise, not to be confused with the California College Promise Grant, but the College Promise is at many of our community colleges, not all. They're all a little different, but many of them help out with free tuition for first-time, full-time students. And again, this could just be another program for students to look into and get connected to for support. So a lot of resources. We have a website that we manage, californiacollegepathways.org. It has all the information you need to know about higher ed, but there's a tool on here. You can see this orange button that says find support, and students or caregivers can go on there, look up a college, and see the contact information for their specific foster youth support program. So this can be another helpful tool to guide them in that process as well. There's additional resources beyond just what is at the college campus. And we know that, planning for college can be complicated, even for the most organized family. So here's additional resources that can be tapped into as well. There's definitely a lot of resources at the K-12 districts. For example, academic counselors. Many high schools also have college counselors. And every district at the high school also has a foster youth district liaison. They can help out with getting the student connected to tutoring or maybe helping with partial credits. And then definitely tap into your local county Office of Education. On this screen, I have the information for LA County. Of course, update this with your local program if you're doing this training outside of LA County. But they provide a lot of trainings and technical assistance. They can also help with a host of things, but educational case management, transition to college and career services. And for our folks local in LA, you can start off by reaching out to your local LACO FYSCP counselor for assistance. And they can even attend meetings with the students to advocate for them. And we have a handout on the side with contact information for this program and others to help you get connected. There's also the Independent Living Program. And this is a voluntary program through Child Welfare and Probation, and it provides services and funding to help youth with gaining independent living skills. There's a narrow eligibility. They have to have been in care, suitably placed at least one day between the ages of 16 and 18. Figuring out eligibility can be complicated, so start with your social worker or probation officer and they can get you connected. But they help out with services from post-secondary ed to workforce to housing. They have financial assistance for unmet need for things like high school graduation expenses, prom, college tuition, books, supplies, even housing deposits for dorms. And for those folks local in LA County, You can go to ilponline.org for more info. And again, if you're doing this training outside of LA County, just simply update the slide with your local program's contact information. But lastly, I just wanted to note, we want to make sure that caregivers feel like they're part of a team. And while we're trying to equip caregivers, they should also leverage the team that they're a part of to think about getting our youth connected to support and making a plan for their higher education and for their future. And the Child and Family Team Meeting, the CFTM, is a great place to do this. A lot of times it's very focused on crisis, immediate needs, but it doesn't have to be. It can be used to talk about the youth's long-term goal, to talk about all of these educational planning milestones, and think about how they can get connected to resources and make goals along the way. This could be another opportunity to do a third quiz on this material. I think for the sake of time, we're not going to do a quiz right now, but I did want to note that for these quizzes in the trainer's guide, we're going to have sample questions in the trainer's guide. So if you want to go the route of a quiz to engage your audience, we'll have pre-created questions that you can utilize as well. And lastly here, I just wanted to summarize, we've provided a lot of handouts and a lot of resources throughout the training. And this just kind of gives a summary of those materials that will be found on the link for caregivers. And really just make sure to have them use them as they need them, right? If they're trying to figure out which pathway to use, maybe reference that educational pathway handout. If they're thinking about financial aid, go to that financial aid guide. There is an additional resource listed on here, mentioned the Foster Youth Benefits Eligibility Chart. And it's just a summary of all these potential benefits that foster youth can potentially be eligible for based on their time and care. So it's a nice kind of quick reference guide to figure out, okay, based on their time and care, what can they tap into related to post-secondary ed or even other resources as well. So in closing, another activity you can do, and again, think about your audience, whether you want to do quizzes or other interactive opportunities, but another closing activity you can do is a vignette. And so in the caregiver materials, there's a link to a vignette that has a student scenario that highlights some of the common challenges. And in the trainer's guide, there's suggestions on, common themes to kind of hit on in the vignette with the student. And have them, again, just have another opportunity to practice what they've learned. So again, you can do quizzes or you can use a vignette and, put people into small groups. If you're doing this training via Zoom meeting, not Zoom webinar, but definitely recommend Zoom meeting, then you can put your attendees into breakout groups and they can, discuss the vignette and apply the information to that student scenario. And I think there's a lot of research that shows that having an opportunity for peer learning can really help them maintain and remember the information as well. So I think what we're going to do just in closing is when you're ending the training, they've received a lot of information. You all have just received a lot of information. We want caregivers to think about what's at least one thing that they can do differently with their youth within the next 30 days. So we want to really have them think about how to apply this information and do it immediately, not down the road or in the future. So what I'm going to do, we'll just use Mentee one more time, but this can be a conversation with your caregivers. This could be something that they type into the chat, but really just sharing with their peers who are also in this training, what they're going to do with their young people. So let me pull this up real quick. Sorry, one moment. Okay. All right, so hopefully you can see the screen there. Is that right, Debbie? See the Mentee screen? Yeah, I think you should. Okay. So here's just another opportunity. If you want to just go to mentee.com, put in the code, and think about one thing that you'll do differently with your youth in the next 30 days. And see, we got some people even putting it in the chat too, which I appreciate. Someone saying, discuss future plans regarding education, which I appreciate that. So if you want to log in. Oh, great, here we go. Talk about short-term goals and long-term goals. Start preparing them about their career choices after high school. Use career planning tool, great. Take a youth to visit a college campus, explore colleges, talk about plans after high school. I like this, planting the seed for the future. Encourage staff to share the idea of college frequently with youth. Talk about academic goals, future college, great. So these sound like great plans. I think plans that will really make a difference for our young people. So that's really the end of our training. Just wanted to thank you all so much for joining us today, being with us for these last 3 hours. Again, we will record today's webinar, put it on that link as well. If you have anyone else that needs to access it or you'd like to access it in the future, we'll get that trainer's guide for you as well next week. But if there's any other closing questions, feel free to submit them right now. I don't think we had any other pending questions, but thank you all. Appreciate all you're doing to support our youth.